All right, let's dive right into this explainer because today we are uncovering the incredibly high stakes, microscopic military mission that is happening inside your body every single day. You see, our immune system isn't just some simple passive network. It's actually this immensely sophisticated matrix of cells and chemical signals, and they are working relentlessly to protect us from invaders. So today we're going to focus on the absolute front line of that defense system. And I want you to just look at this staggering number right here, 100 billion. That is exactly how many of these specific immune system shock troops your bone marrow is churning out daily. I mean, just think about that scale for a second. Every single day, your body is producing a massive microscopic army, literally ready to deploy at a moment's notice just to keep you alive. Section 1. Meet the shock troops, our frontline defenders. So the specific troops we're talking about today, these frontline defenders, are technically known as polymorphonuclear neutrophils, or PMNs for short. Now, you might just know them as white blood cells or maybe granulocytes, but whatever you call them, they are the absolute workhorses. They're basically the SWAT team of your innate immune system. They belong to what's called the myeloid line of cells, myelos being the Greek word for marrow. And these guys, they are the shoot now, ask questions later frontline infantry. They're the absolute first to arrive on the scene whenever a microbial invader breaches your body's borders. But here's the thing. These troops don't just magically appear ready for combat. They actually begin as stem cells and have to go through this rigorous 14-day boot camp inside your bone marrow just to mature. And during that time, they're gaining the ability to detect invaders, signal other cells, and ultimately destroy pathogens. But get this. Once they're released into your bloodstream, if they don't see any action, their lifespan is incredibly short. We're talking just 1 to 2 days. If they do encounter a bacterial or viral enemy, though, they'll stick around for several days in active combat mode. Moving on to Section 2, Deployment and the Signal, let's head into the battlefield. Okay, so to get from the rushing river of your bloodstream directly to the battlefield where they're actually needed, your neutrophils execute this brilliant, highly coordinated maneuver. As they're flowing super fast through your blood vessels, the smooth inner lining of the blood vessel, the endothelium, gets a distress signal. It then projects these tiny proteins called selectins. The neutrophil forms a loose bond with these selectins, which creates this sort of touch-and-go landing that momentarily slows it down. Then, if the local tissues are releasing a specific chemical signal called interleukin-8, or IL-8, the neutrophil makes a hard stop. It firmly attaches to the blood vessel wall, physically wiggles its way out of the bloodstream, and follows that IL-8 chemical breadcrumb trail straight into the infected tissue. Section 3, Weapons of Microscopic Destruction, the neutrophil arsenal. Honestly, the initial attack is beautifully brutal. The neutrophil literally eats the invader in a process known as phagocytosis. The bacterial prey is surrounded, completely swallowed up, and trapped inside this highly lethal internal compartment called a phagosome. And just to make sure the bacteria can't slip away, other members of the immune system, specifically the complement system, actually anchor the invader to the neutrophil's surface. It's this awesome assist maneuver, officially known as opsonization. And this perfectly illustrates their built-in armory. Inside the neutrophil are these tiny membrane-bound sacs called vacuoles or granules. You can basically think of these as microscopic hand grenades, and they come in a few different types, primarily primary and secondary. The primary granules unleash myeloperoxidase, or MPO, which literally exposes the trapped microbe to bleach. Yeah, actual bleach. They also drop defensins, which poke these lethal holes right through the bacterial membrane. Then the secondary granules release lactoferrin, which acts like a massive iron sponge to completely starve the bacteria of essential nutrients. And finally, both types unleash lysozyme, which forcefully disrupts and shatters the bacterial cell walls. It is just a highly coordinated, incredibly toxic bombardment. But wait, the neutrophil's absolute, most mind-blowing ultimate weapon happens right at the very end of its life. If the cell has completed its mission and is actively dying, it can actually release its own DNA, RNA, and toxic granular proteins outward into the surrounding tissue. This forms a literal web called a net, or neutrophil extracellular trap. The dying cell is literally using its own guts as a highly toxic net to physically entrap and kill the surrounding microbes, basically ensuring it takes down as many enemies as possible on its way out. Section 4. The bacteria strike back. An evolutionary arms race. Because, the bacteria aren't just going to sit there and take it, right? Take a really resourceful villain like Staphylococcus aureus, which we commonly know as staph. It has evolved these highly specific countermeasures to survive the neutrophil's attack. For instance, it produces an enzyme called catalase, specifically to destroy that lethal hydrogen peroxide burst. It also secretes this golden pigment that acts as an antioxidant shield. It uses coagulase to wrap itself in a gooey, protective clot so the neutrophil can't even eat it. It deploys protein A to block those opsonization anchors we talked about earlier. And it even creates this vile substance called PVL toxin, which is designed to actively seek out and destroy your neutrophils. It's just this endless, microscopic war of escalation. Section 5. The ultimate sacrifice. Pus. The aftermath of combat. Let's connect this intense microscopic combat back to something you have definitely experienced in real life, the visible aftermath. When a neutrophil successfully kills a mild intruder, it undergoes apoptosis. This is a very peaceful, orderly, self-induced death where friendly cells called macrophages just quietly clean up the remains. But when the infection is severe and the combat is heavy, millions of these dead white blood cells rapidly accumulate. This visible accumulation of casualties is exactly what we recognize as pus. And hey, if you've ever noticed pus having a slightly greenish tint to it, that is actually the visible presence of that MPO bleach enzyme from the neutrophil's lethal primary granules. I absolutely love this framing from the historian Guido Magino in his book on ancient medicine, The Healing Hand. He wrote, "Pus is therefore a noble substance. It is made of brave cells that never sneak back into the blood vessels to escape. They all die in the line of duty." It totally changes your perspective, doesn't it? Instead of just being something gross, pus is actually this heroic, microscopic battlefield monument to these brave little cells that fought to keep you healthy. But here is the catch. All this toxic firepower is incredibly hazardous. Neutrophils can just as easily destroy healthy human tissue, like the collagen holding your cells together, if they aren't strictly controlled. And that is exactly where the macrophages step in, acting as the generals of the immune system. Once the threat is neutralized, macrophages secrete a chemical signal called interleukin-10, or IL-10. This effectively calls a ceasefire, putting the brakes on any further neutrophil deployment and shifting the body's entire focus toward relief, healing, and tissue repair. Section 6. Reading the battlefield. Clinical indicators. So how does your doctor actually read the aftermath of these unseen battles? Well, when you get a complete blood count, or a CBC, the lab is looking right at the numbers of these specific troops. A normal white blood cell count is somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 cells per microliter of blood, with neutrophils making up roughly 1,500 to 8,000 of those. Now, if your numbers are massively elevated, a condition known as leukocytosis, that is a huge red flag to your doctor that a war is currently raging inside you. Conversely, a reduced count, called leukopenia, means your defenses might be dangerously compromised. But it's not just about the sheer numbers. Doctors are also looking at the maturity of the troops. A fully mature, 14-day trained neutrophil has this very distinctive multi-lobed nucleus. But if your body is actively losing the war and desperately needs sudden reinforcements, the bone marrow will actually release immature neutrophils early. These rookies haven't fully developed yet, so their nucleus looks like a simple C-shape. In the medical field, these immature recruits are affectionately called bands. And on traditional laboratory diagrams that track neutrophil development, the immature forms are drawn on the left side of the chart and the mature ones on the right. So if your blood test shows a massive spike in these immature C-shaped band cells, doctors call this a shift to the left. It's a massive clinical indicator that your bone marrow is frantically pumping out early reinforcements to fight off an ongoing, usually bacterial, infection. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today. The next time you get a simple cut or even just look at a routine blood test, I want you to think about this immense, complex network standing guard. What invisible battles are raging inside you right now? And how many brave cells will make the ultimate sacrifice today just to keep you alive? Thank you so much for exploring the microscopic battlefield with me. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.